When you look for the bad in mankind, expecting to find it, you surely will. Abraham Lincoln.
He was the president.
Yes, I know. But I never heard that before.
Well, you wouldn't have heard that before, because old Abe never actually said it. The quote did, however, show up in the novel this film is based on.
Well, of course I was rather disappointed, so my father made up the glad game.
The what game?
Pollyanna is a classic children's book by Eleanor Porter, first published in 1913. A simple story about an orphan girl who tries to be glad about everything. It was a significant hit at the time.
I'm glad of that.
A total of 12 sequels followed, as well as a licensed board game that sold for over 50 years.
I just thought you could play the game.
Pollyanna was of course played by America's sweetheart Mary Pickford in the silent era, and her version was the most prominent film until 1960.
And from then on, he was going to look for the good in people.
Of course this was made by Disney.
Yes, I'm your friend.
The book was still relatively popular in the 50s, if not as much as it had been when it was first published. We'll get to that later. So this was going to be an especially prestigious film.
I knew I could count on you for some lofty clinical observation.
Aunt Polly would be played by Oscar winner Jane Wyman, with noted action star Richard Egan as her love interest.
What that child needs is a good shot in the arm of hope.
Veteran character actors like Adolphe Menjou and Agnes Moorehead were cast in prominent supporting roles, and even Nancy the Maid was played by Oscar nominee Nancy Olson.
You never met anyone so cantankerous. If it was Friday, she'd wish it was Tuesday.
And of course, friggin' Carl Malden as Reverend Ford. The man knew how to play a priest.
Boys, this is my church. And if you don't think Christ is down here on the waterfront, you've got another guest coming.
Even the unknown Hayley Mills in the title role still had a lot of buzz for being the daughter of John Mills.
Your aunt's waiting for you, miss.
The film retains the same basic framework of the original novel.
I'm your Aunt Polly.
An orphan called Pollyanna Whittier goes to live with her cold and distant Aunt Polly.
I think she'd do better than this for her own niece.
Through playing her glad game, finding a reason to be happy about every situation, she single-handedly defrosts the entire town.
And thank you for showing me your house.
But I didn't show you my house. You came barging in here.
Goodbye.
The film, however, expands on a lot, which explains the 2-hour-plus runtime.
Get down my cake tins, Angie. We're going to work. Doing what? Think she's the Queen of Sheba, does she?
New characters are added, such as a grumpy maid Angelica.
Who's that man down there with Nancy?
None of your business.
Nancy gets a small subplot involving a lover Aunt Polly disapproves of.
No one will make a move in this town without the Harrington stamp of approval on it.
Aunt Polly herself has an expanded role where she now controls the town through her wealth and influence, and a movie-exclusive subplot has the townspeople organising a fundraiser in defiance of her.
But Aunt Polly, I'm part of the flag.
We won't discuss it. I don't want you to see those people anymore, and that's an order.
So now our simple children's book becomes a 2-hour, 12-minute film.
Goodbye, Pollyanna. Bye.
The length does intimidate me sometimes, and I've occasionally found myself wondering if it really needed to be this long, but if you sit down and really appreciate it, the answer is a definitive yes.
I love you, Aunt Polly.
The pace is slow and sometimes episodic, but there are no scenes padded out, and everything that happens in each scene is important.
Did you find your room satisfactory?
Oh, yes, it's very nice, thank you.
You hadn't mentioned it, so I just wondered.
In a lot of ways, Pollyanna feels like a test run for Mary Poppins, which followed just 4 years later, and not just because Rita Shaw plays the cook in both.
Will that make everything all right?
Thank you.
Mary and Pollyanna arrive into the story not wanting or needing anything, or getting any meaningful character growth.
He mended it!
Instead, their presence inspires character development in others, most significantly an adult figure who needs to show love to a child.
And I love you as if you were my own little girl.
Both are inventions of their respective films, and Aunt Polly actually defrosts a bit earlier in the book, but of course it works for the film format, and I can really appreciate the nuance in Aunt Polly's character the older I get.
Keep busy, Polly. Lots of meetings and civic duties and obligations. It's a poor substitute for what's really wrong with you.
A three-dimensional woman in power whose flaws don't come from not needing a man or not being maternal.
There's no medical term for it. You can give everything but love. It's as simple as that.
Both of those are in the story, but they're extensions of her main character flaw.
After all, there is an obligation to having wealth.
Haven't you learned yet that people don't like false charity?
She's not a bad person, and in fact does many good things, but she only does so out of obligation.
It's my duty.
She takes Pollyanna in because she feels it's her duty, and her preference for having things done her way creates most of the story's conflict.
You're afraid of Polly Harrington paying them back later. She'll do it too, you know her.
And this film may be titled Pollyanna, but it's really Aunt Polly's story.
They blame me, don't they?
No, nobody's blaming you.
But it's true, isn't it?
Even the changes to Pollyanna's accident from book to film really enhance this.
I could have been the least bit understanding. That child lies up there because of me.
In the book, she gets hit by a car, which director David Swift found too coincidental. In the film, she falls from her bedroom window.
I must be higher up in the house than anyone, aren't I?
Her bedroom is in the attic, which is where Aunt Polly put her.
Well, I'm not used to children's noises around the house, and that's the reason I chose that one.
She falls because she was sneaking back into the house from the bazaar that Polly wouldn't let her go to, and actually turned down the offer to take her to.
No, I could not. Good night.
And when Polly finally has her realization and tries to give her niece the affection she needed, Pollyanna silently rejects her because it's too little too late after all the times Polly denied her that love.
Won't you give me that chance? Please.
Jane Wyman's performance is actually pretty subtle, which is again surprising since a lot of the others in the movie are quite big.
God works in ways mysterious to
Don't
man.
speak to me about God. Say what you think.
It says a lot that there's a scene where she dramatically lets her hair down after an argument with her lover, and it's not remotely as melodramatic as it sounds. And she plays the heel realization expertly.
Polly, the mercy of God is forgiving.
Oh, what kind of a merciful God could allow a thing like this to happen to a child?
Overall, Aunt Polly is a surprisingly four-dimensional character in this film, and that's as a result of Disney realizing that it was as much her story as Pollyanna's.
Aunt Polly?
Hayley Mills was the last winner of the Specialized Juvenile Academy Awards specifically for her performance here.
I'm not supposed to be glad. We're so very rich. Huh?
Obviously, at only 13, it's not amazing work, but when sharing the screen with the veterans in the cast...
Do you like being a minister?
This one with Carl Malden was actually her first day on set, and it was an especially tricky one to shoot, and it's one of her stronger performances in the film.
I suppose every minister of God faces the same problem.
I suppose.
I can appreciate one choice she makes in particular.
Once I saw him sort of sad like that, and I asked him.
The book has Pollyanna as an American girl, and Hayley Mills was cast simply because Walt liked her work in Tiger Bay. So she adds some American pronunciations in there to suggest her speech patterns came from both parents, as her mother was of course Aunt Polly's sister.
All right, Nancy?
I do have to say, she'll probably always be my favourite Pollyanna, and she brings something very unique to the role.
I'm not at all pretty.
Oh, but you are. And you don't look sick at all.
It's actually not an easy one to play.
My father said, don't let's be gloomy. Let's try and find something to be glad about.
Pollyanna as a character is usually misremembered, which we can thank decades of mid-20th century cynicism for.
So we made a game of it. The glad game.
According to pop culture, she's the poster girl for toxic positivity, and even her name has become a somewhat loaded term for an idiot living in a fantasy world of idealism.
Oh, I am glad. I think everyone should be married.
But here's the thing. Eleanor Porter didn't write Pollyanna as a one-dimensional manic pixie there to cheer up her town.
Oh, I don't care what you do.
Pollyanna's glad game was something her father came up with to make her feel better about being too poor to afford any new clothes or toys.
But surely he could afford a little thing like a doll.
Well, he couldn't. We had to have the money for food.
It's there in the text that the game is Pollyanna's own personal coping mechanism for the hardships she suffered in life.
Helps sometimes.
Helps what?
When things aren't going so well.
There's a sequence in the book where she cries at her father's grave and says that being positive all the time is incredibly hard. The film replaces this with a scene where she loses it at Mrs. Snow for being obsessed with dying.
You ought to forget about dying and be glad you're living.
and it's clearly coming from orphan outrage.
I'm not going to come and see you anymore.
So this is really a character who suffered plenty of loss, choosing to maturely adopt a positive outlook on life because it's a choice between that and falling apart. David Swift definitely understood Pollyanna as a character, and you can see that in the movie's tone.
She's been pestering folks all over town with this sunshine and happiness thing. Hearts and flowers.
It's very surprising that for a Disney movie that's literally about looking on the positive side of things, it doesn't beat you over the head with its message.
The text?
Yes, you know. My father called them the glad passages.
David Swift actively made Pollyanna shyer, and emphasised that the glad game was mainly for herself, and most of the adults are put off by it.
Glad this, glad that. You have to be glad about everything. What's the matter with you anyway?
Nancy gets a slight change in character so that she's cold to Pollyanna at first, and doesn't warm to her until she saves her from being fired.
Have you been carrying on with George Dodds again?
Oh, it was my fault, Aunt Polly.
This makes it so that Pollyanna has to earn the friendships she makes throughout the story, giving things a more incidental vibe. There are many scenes that should feel saccharine, but the movie knows how to play its cards, and the result is a genuine sweetness.
I always wanted a doll, but we never had enough money for things like that.
Mrs. Snow, for example, is the one who gets told that Pollyanna never had a doll growing up, and ends up earning her redemption by making sure she gets one at the bazaar.
She's mine! Oh, how did they know?
David Swift recognised that the first 2 hours are carefully building towards the payoff in the finale, and this is what would make or break the story.
It was a silly game. I hate it. I'll never want to play it again.
The sequence has Pollyanna finally reaching her breaking point, unable to be glad about anything, and it's then that the whole town turns up to wish her well as thanks for all she's done for them.
What is everybody sniffing about? My goodness, a bunch of ninnies think a person couldn't get well.
There are numerous payoffs going off in these few minutes, and it's actually hard for me to sell just how cathartic the scene is. Aunt Polly's snobby friend redeeming herself?
You'll be all right, dear. I know.
A one-scene character echoing a goofy line to heartwarming effect?
Oh, we don't have to look at it as though it was charity. Just a gift.
Just a gift from one friend to another.
And the most powerful line Carl Malden delivers in the film?
We looked for the good in them, and we found it, didn't we?
The film's approach to its tone results in a surprising inversion of the book's ending. There we're told that her operation was successful, she's able to walk again, and Aunt Polly gets married. The film, however, shows a lot of restraint, just ending with them on the way to the operation.
You and I together.
It's implied that Polly and Edmund might get together, but the openness of it is all the more effective. And I personally love that the movie never says whether Pollyanna walks again, because that makes for a stronger message.
This depression she's got herself into, that's what's worrying me.
It's not only about being positive when good things happen to you, but learning to take the bad with the good. Her attitude is what matters, not her circumstances. Or as Eleanor Porter put it herself right before she died, "You know, I have been made to suffer from the Pollyanna books. I have been placed often in a false light. People have thought that Pollyanna chirped that she was glad at everything. I have never believed that we ought to deny discomfort and pain and evil. I have merely thought it is far better to greet the unknown with a cheer."
My father said, if God took the trouble to tell us 800 times to be glad and rejoice, he must have wanted us to do it.
Somewhere in the 2010s, the real power of Pollyanna's story hit me and has stayed with me ever since. I'm glad it was made the way it was, and I'm glad it exists.
My father used to say, a person should think about living.
Ruth Graham put it best in her article, How We All Became Pollyannas. Welcome to the 21st century, Pollyanna. You'll fit right in.
Early one morning, just as